The man who owned the lake. You need to move that boat immediately or we'll have it towed. Those words shattered the peaceful hum of my Saturday morning like a rock through glass. I looked up from my coffee, sitting cross-legged on the deck of my old fishing boat, Liberty, docked calmly at the end of my private pier. The lake breeze was gentle. Duke, my German shepherd, was dozing at my feet, and the sun hadn't even burned through the haze yet. The man yelling stood on my dock like he owned it. Red-faced, khaki shorts, tucked-in polo shirt, and clutching a clipboard like it was some kind of weapon. Behind him, a half-dozen other folks loitered, members of the HOA, dressed for a weekend fishing outing like it was a royal affair. They looked smug, entitled, confident. "We've received multiple complaints," the man barked, stepping closer. "This lake falls under HOA control. You can't just park your boat here without a permit." I set my coffee down slowly, stood up, and looked him in the eye. "I own the lake," I said. Silence rippled across the dock. One woman nearly dropped her mimosa. Another looked between the water and me as if I had just announced the moon was mine. "I own this lake," I repeated, steady, measured, calm. Then I walked over to the waterproof compartment on Liberty, opened the lockbox, and pulled out the deed. I held it up like a poker hand, let them see the bolded county seal, and smiled faintly. "I think you should sit down for this. Let's rewind. At a few years back, I bought a forgotten slice of land tucked at the edge of a newly minted suburban development. At the time, it was nothing. Overgrown brush, a half-rotted cabin, and a lake choked with reeds and silence. Most people saw a swamp. I saw peace. I'd just gone through a divorce, and I needed a place that wouldn't talk back. The cabin gave me shelter. The lake gave me sanity. Every morning, I woke to ducks skimming the water and dragonflies zipping through the mist. I fixed up the cabin, rebuilt the dock, bought an old second-hand fishing boat and named her Liberty because, well, that's what it felt like. What I didn't do was join the HOA. I didn't have to. My parcel had been carved out long before the rest of the development was laid down. My property lines were clear, and the lake, about 3 acres in the center of it all, sat entirely on my deed. But the HOA didn't know that. Or maybe they just didn't care. At first, it was innocent. They started showing up on weekends with folding chairs and cheap rods, holding social fishing Sundays, as they called it. I let it go. I figured sharing a little piece wasn't the worst thing, but they got louder. The crowds got bigger. Trash started floating in the reeds. Cans, wrappers, beer bottles. I asked politely. I posted signs. I even spoke at an HOA meeting. That's when Greg Beckman entered the picture, the clipboard-waving commander from earlier. Greg was the president of the HOA, the kind of man who treats bylaws like scripture. 1 week after I asked for some courtesy, I received a letter saying I was in violation of HOA policy for mooring an unlicensed vessel on communal property. They claimed the lake was theirs. So I walked into their next meeting with a rolled-up county deed, real friendly. Greg didn't let me speak. Told me they don't acknowledge external land claims, that I need to submit a petition for review through HOA channels. I left that meeting stunned. They were either out of touch or dangerously confident. I decided to give it time. Maybe they'd realize their mistake. They didn't. The letters turned into fines. They claimed my dock was obstructing neighborhood lake views. Then they started using the lake like it was theirs again. Loud events. Boats I didn't recognize. Someone even dragged a floating beer pong table into the water one Saturday, that morning. When Greg and his crew marched onto my dock to evict me from Liberty, I was done. Greg reached for my deed. I pulled it back. "You know what?" I said. "Let's call the sheriff. You bring your permits. I'll bring my deed. Let's see who ends up in cuffs." Greg blustered and huffed, but eventually backed down. The crowd of fishing friends started packing up their rods and coolers, suddenly not so sure. But Greg wasn't finished. "If that boat is still here tomorrow," he snapped, "it'll be towed." I laughed. "By who? You? Good luck hauling a 2-ton boat off private water." He left furious. I installed cameras that night. Motion sensors. Floodlights. I wasn't taking chances. Sure enough, the next morning at dawn, Duke started barking like a man possessed. I pulled on my coat, grabbed my phone, and ran down to the dock. Greg was back, with a rented barge, 2 men, and a crane. They were trying to figure out how to hook Liberty to a winch that I hit the floodlights. "Get off my property." They froze like deer. Greg shaded his eyes. "This is your last chance," he yelled. "We have HOA clearance." I raised my phone, dialing the sheriff. "You've made a huge mistake," I said. That I lifted the deed again, holding it toward the dock's camera. One of the workers asked Greg, "Whose name's on the lake again?" Greg stammered, "It's communal. It's in our HOA registry." The worker frowned. "Then why does the county say it's owned by a Matthew Cole?" I raised my hand. "That's me." Greg went white. The workers began backing up. Then Greg, in a fit of rage, kicked the dock's railing and slipped. With a tremendous splash, he plunged into the lake he thought he controlled. As he surfaced, sputtering, a plastic cooler floated up beside him. Inside, his phone, his precious clipboard, soaked and bobbing like a dumb trophy. That should have been the end. But Greg climbed out, dripping, humiliated, looking like a drowned otter in khakis. His entourage stood paralyzed. I crossed my arms. "You trespassed. You endangered people. And I've got it all on tape." The sheriff arrived 15 minutes later. Greg tried to bluff, yelling about illegal use of HOA resources. The officer raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Cole owns this lake. The entire lake. And the surrounding 50 feet. Greg sputtered. "That's not possible." The officer shrugged. "It's verified with the county. The HOA built around it. Doesn't make it yours." And then, as if on cue, the cuffs clicked. Greg was escorted to the cruiser, shoes squishing, muttering, "This isn't over." He was right, because 2 days later, I got another letter. Certified mail. This one signed by Cynthia Beckman, Greg's wife, newly instated as acting president of the HOA. That I was being summoned to a disciplinary hearing. The charges? Disruption of community harmony, misuse of shared space, threatening behavior. That I nearly choked on my coffee. They renamed the lake, I said to Frank, my lawyer. They hung a banner. "Lake Beckman, property of the people." Frank sighed. "Show up. Bring everything. They've got pride. We've got facts." The community hall was packed. Cynthia looked like she was running for Congress. Hair sprayed, pearls gleaming, voice sharp as scissors. "You've interfered with community events," she said. "You've harassed residents. And you continue to restrict access to what we've always considered shared waters." I held up my folder. "Here's the deed. Here's the plat map. Here's the county water rights. Filed and certified 12 years before your HOA even existed." They didn't want facts. They wanted submission. And when that didn't work, they escalated again. 2 days later, they hosted a massive community fishing day. Loud music, inflatable rafts, trash bins dumped at the shoreline. A banner stretched between 2 trees. "Lake Beckman, for the people." I hit the switch, literally. The speakers cut off. The lights shut down. The crowd went quiet. Then I walked onto the dock with a bullhorn and said, "This is private property. You're trespassing. The sheriff is on the way." And they came, along with the county water department. Within 30 minutes, the lake was cleared. Cynthia stood trembling in rage, claiming tyranny. "This isn't over," she snapped. She was right. 3 days later, I got served again. This time by a group called the Environmental Stewardship Coalition. Cynthia had gone state level. That she convinced them I was abusing the lake, that I was blocking public access, damaging the environment, endangering wildlife. So I let them come. And when they did, I showed them everything. The bee garden, the fish shelters, the waste filtration I installed myself. One of them, Sophie, nodded thoughtfully. "You're doing more conservation than most parks." Then came the night everything changed. That I woke up to tires on gravel. Outside, a flatbed, a backhoe, several barrels, and Greg Beckman, covered in sweat, holding a gas can. "What are you doing?" I yelled. Stepping into the light, he turned wild-eyed. "She ruined everything," he hissed. "You ruined everything." I hit the emergency alert on my phone. Greg lunged for the backhoe. Duke barked and launched. I tackled Greg to the ground before he could move the lever. 5 minutes later, the sheriff arrived. The barrels were laced with fertilizer and fuel that he'd planned to poison the lake. Not win, just destroy. Greg was charged with attempted ecological terrorism. It was all over the news. Cynthia disappeared. Rumors swirled. She filed for divorce, moved away, changed her name. 6 months later, the HOA restructured. They asked me to join. I declined. Instead, I posted a new sign by the dock. Welcome to Lake Cole. Respect the land. Respect the water. Respect each other. And under that, in smaller print, this isn't a rule. It's a reminder. I still let people fish. Just ask first. Peace isn't something you inherit. You make it, one ripple at a time.